got the level 3 science manufacturing technician. As a bit of an overview, if you've been here before, you will know that we are going to go through who SIAS are and what we do. If you already work with us, you'll be familiar already. For those of you who are new, welcome, and we'll give you that overview. We're going to talk about the standards specifically, and then we'll break down each of the assessment methods as well and discuss, you know, how they work in practice. We'll think about tracking the apprenticeship, getting our apprentices ready for endpoint, how we work with the employer. So this is the registered assessor for the endpoint. As I've said, questions at the end, and then my colleague Rob is going to come in and talk with you about the provider portal as well, and the support that we can provide via a SharePoint portal that we've developed in order for you to access guidance material. But equally, if you're a provider, upload your quals to us there as well. Okay, and Rob will give you a little bit more about that at the end. So then, we are the Science Industry Assessment Service, and we specialise in endpoint assessment for roles within R&D, production and engineering, and analytical services across all of the manufacturing, science and health sectors. Okie dokes. So we design all of the assessment tests in line with the institute, the assessment plans based on the Institute for found on the Institute for Apprenticeships rather, and we deliver all of those assessment tests as well. All right, we do quality assure them. We will train in all of the SIAS assurers that facilitate or come into your sites to do endpoint assessment, and it is SIAS's responsibility to claim the overall apprenticeship award as well. So by the time you hear from us in writing that your apprentice has passed, we will already have claimed that certificate, the overall apprenticeship certificate, and then we send it off to yourselves, or well, to the apprentice at the address of the workplace, unless specified somewhere different. Okie dokes. Excuse me, sorry. So what standards do we work with then? Well, we have a little raft of level 2s now. So we've got the science manufacturing process operative, the engineering operative at level 2, and the lean manufacturing operative at level 2. The level 3s, so we've got the science manufacturing technician at level 3, the lab technician at level 3, industry maintenance tech, and the maintenance and operations engineering technician as well. We've got the technician scientist at level 5, which takes the place of the retired was the original lab scientist. We now have the new degree apprenticeship lab scientist at level 6, as well as science industry process plant engineer, and then research scientist at level 7. So we've got quite the raft now of science and engineering from levels 2 all the way up to 7. So we're going to think today specifically about the science manufacturing technician route. So this is operating the systems and equipment that's involved in the production of products. It's a level 3 standard, and the maximum funding band there is 27,000. In accordance with the assessment plan, they say that there is a 20 months on average training period. 27 months. We've seen these at about 27 months up to 36-ish months. And then the APA must follow in the sort of final 12 weeks or the final 3 months beyond that. All right. One of the first standards, again, so there's these 2 gateways that we're working with. So the gateway 1 is a health and safety gateway. This usually takes place within the sort of first 6 months. And you're thinking about when the apprentice starts in their company, they're issued with PPE, they'll be given some induction, some training, all of that kind of thing. It's not necessarily checked until the end, because the health and safety should underpin all of the apprentices' learning journey and their training. So therefore, it can be checked during the assessment methods at the end. Gateway 2 then, a little bit, you know, the standard gateway, I suppose, the one that comes right at the end of the training period, whereby we're looking for the completion. So there is a mandated tech cert in this. Obviously, we have our level 2 in English and Maths, or GCSE functional skills, a signed off behaviours evaluation, and a signed off competency evaluation log as well. And this is the employer sign off to say, yes, my apprentice, they are safe, they are competent, they are ready for endpoint assessment. Okay. So then, if we think about the process, the APA itself, or what is it made up of? We've got the 3 assessment methods there. So we've got the case study scenario, the SAT. This is the synoptic assessment test. This is the practical aspect. This is then followed by the VCD, which is the vocational competency discussion. All right. Now, traditionally, or how we run it, we would tend to do the SAT in the morning, followed by the VCD in the afternoon, and then the case study scenario will fall in and around that. So there's no order of these assessments in which they should pan out. That's just the way we plan it in. So the SAT first, followed by the VCD, and then we may do the case study scenario sort of before or after. All right. The SAT, the synoptic assessment test, that is not graded per se, it is only a pass or a fail. All right. So if your apprentices are looking to go for those higher grades, those distinctions, their behaviours, and I'm going to come on to that in a couple of slides time, but equally the case study will either go fail, pass or distinction, so will the VCD as well. So if they are looking for distinctions, it's the case study, the VCD and their behaviours that will allow them to access that higher grade. The SAT is very much a pass or a fail. They either demonstrate full competency or they don't. Okay. So then let's start with the SAT. This is the SYNOPTIC assessment test. What we're looking to do is validate the apprentice's competency by observing them carrying out their job role in a normal working environment. Simulation is not permitted. We want them to be working on a realistic job in their workplace. All right. And we are looking for anything that lasts between a task or tasks rather, that lasts between 2 and 4 hours. Again, this is a stipulation from the assessment plan. So we need to make sure that it's at least 2 hours and no more than 4 hours. We have to stop the time at that point. All right. This, if you're thinking about a time commitment, particularly from an employer perspective, you think this is going to be about a morning of time. Okay. So what happens? We ask the employer to plan in the task or tasks that the apprentice is going to be doing. And we ask them to submit this via a schedule, SAT schedule to us at SIAS, okay? We review and agree that. Now, what we're looking for out of a review, I suppose, is that whatever's been planned in by the employer, the task or tasks, that there's enough in it to fully cover the test specification. All right, now we show the employer the test specification. So we show them what we're going to be marking against. And then we say, please, can you plan in your task or tasks around this? And we can look at that plan and go, great. If we see an apprentice do all of that on the day, there's enough in that for that apprentice to pass. All right. So remember, there's no higher grade available. They are just looking to pass at this point. The employers put a lot of work into that. We ask the employer to sit in on that observation with us. We want that employer to observe the SAT. Okay. The employer is referred to in this instance as the registered assessor. Now, this is just terminology from the assessment plan that is referring to a competent person from the employer. Okay, that's competent in the role that's being assessed. So they're going to observe alongside our SIAS assurer, get a good idea as to how their apprentice is has performed. We're then going to discuss that observation with the registered assessor from the employer, but it will be SIAS that makes that final decision on the grading. Okay, so it will be SIAS that decides the final outcome in terms of a pass or a fail. All right. Kinds of things then that an apprentice's SAT can be made up of, the task or tasks. This is manufacturing, so we're thinking production. All right, so we can do one of three kinds of tasks. All right, so we can have a startup of process or plant equipment, and monitor and control of process, plant equipment, or indeed a shutdown of process or plant equipment. All right, so those are the sort of three areas that we're looking for a SAT to be taking place in. We want the apprentice to be able to use work instructions for whatever task it is that they're going to be doing. We want them to be able to access, use and interpret documentation and logs, carry out handovers. We need them to be able to conduct all of the operation, taking into account health and safety, quality, any other internal or external regulation. Complete all documentation, including any calculations where that's pertinent, and then correcting any documentation or reporting any documentation errors. Okay. There might be that if you're looking at this, hopefully you're thinking, oh yeah, I can see where all of that fits in. Sometimes the feedback we get about correcting documentation and reporting documentation errors, people say, well, actually, what if there is no need to error report or anything along the lines of that? This is what your process would be should the apprentice need to do that. So we're not suggesting plant an error within the task or tasks, all right? Just if there was one, what do they do about it? Okay, so it's just testing, do they know how to keep the situation safe and what is the process for that? All right, so that there is an overview of the SAT. So that's the SYNOPTIC assessment test. And as I've said, we're thinking about a morning of time with that. So as I've said, once the practical has taken place, the SIAS assurer alongside the registered assessor from the employer will sit in a bit of a wash-up meeting. They're going to review, think about the observation. And as I've said, it'll be the SIAS assurer that makes that final decision on grading. Okay, so that takes about a morning of time. We then move on to the VCD. All right, so we're thinking about the vocational competence discussion. Now, the VCD allows us to assess more than just the SAT, more than what we've just observed in the SAT in the morning time. All right, so what does the apprentice understand in terms of their role, but matching that up to the requirements of the standard as well. All right, so anything that's not seen during the SAT can be picked up at this point. The duration for the assessment is between 1 and 1.5 hours. Okie dokes. So during that time, your apprentice will be asked 8 questions taken from 10 categories. And the next slide will tell you all about the categories that we've got there. In terms of your apprentice might be a little bit nervous, they might be a little bit unsure of themselves. So what we will do is ask them a question 0. Okay, so we will start the recording. We'll ask them a question 0. This will not be assessed. This is very much to try and put your apprentice at ease and you know, just to get them an overview. So it might be a question like, talk to me a little bit more about your job. Just something that's quite generic, quite open for the apprentice to then be involved in. Okay, that starts the recording. And if they are a little bit fingers and thumbs, or they might fluff the whatever they're going to say, that's okay. It's question 0, it's not marked, it's okay. And then we will go into the assessment. So the assessment itself can take up to 1.5 hours, and there will be 8 assessed questions. Please note that if you have if a SIAS assurer thinks there is more to have from the apprentice, if they are going to follow up on a question, they will do that. All right, so there's 8 categories of questions that are going to be asked, but your SIAS assurer might follow up one of those questions with another question. Okay, remember, your apprentice can refer to a portfolio of evidence as they are going through this, and this was one of the earliest standards, so it's not the hard and fast rules along the lines of what some of the newer standards have in, where they can only have a certain amount of bits of evidence or whatever. Pretty much any part of evidence that has been matched to their standard can go into this portfolio. It might be their NVQ work, it might be their tech cert work. We could have risk assessments, SOPs, e-learning portfolios, reflective learning logs, all of that kind of thing. Okay, what the apprentice needs to be able to do is to talk about what is in that. All right, so they might have reflective accounts, let's say, but ultimately they need to know whatever's in that work, how does that relate to the categories of questions that they might be asked, and then what, their job, what does that give them back? Okay, or what does that allow them to remember? All I can do is apologize, because that's my dog in the background. I'm really sorry. The portfolio of evidence isn't marked during the VCD. All right, so this is very much for your apprentice as an aid memoir to then, just go through and think about the kinds of work that they have done. It is very much a one-to-one. So you, if there's any employers in this, you are not required to be in this. So although we ask for an employer input during the SAT, we don't on the VCD. This is just a one-to-one between the SIAS assurer and the apprentice. Okay, we ask them to be in a room free from distractions. And as I've said, when we were just talking about the portfolio, then we're thinking about, questions that relate always back to their workplace, nothing theoretical. So the SIAS assurer might ask questions along the lines of, tell me about a time when, or describe a situation where, give me examples of. So that's the kind of thing that we're wanting them to sort of touch on. Okay, so back to the workplace all the time. What do they do at work? What is the process, the policies, the procedures? In practice, how does this work? Okay. If we think about those categories of questions, sorry, there's 8 to come from it. That'll be my next slide. So what we will do during the VCD is we'll ask 8 questions taken from the question bank. As I said, I'm going to show you those in a second. The SIAS assurer will lead the discussion of each question, and we are encouraging the apprentice to provide full answers. So as I've said, if we think there's a little bit more to have, we'll ask a follow-up question. Okay, that doesn't come out of the 8, that is a part of the 8. All right. There will be like a further 7 to be asked beyond that, is what I'm going with there. We will complete some notes during the discussion, but it won't be marked until afterwards. Okay, so we do record it, and then the recording and then the notes will be reviewed both together, and we will complete all of the documentation, allocate a final mark there. As I've said, if your apprentice is looking for the distinction here, or looking for distinction rather, this is one of the places that they get it. Okay, so again, these aren't hard and fast rules, but if you sort of think about if you say a description around whatever it is they're going to be asked, if that equates to, let's say, a pass mark, your explanation might get you the more of the distinction mark. All right, so explaining how it works in the workplace rather than just describing it. All right, the categories of questions then. So this is what I was going with before. If you're thinking about putting the portfolio of evidence together and you think, well, actually, we've done this for 3 years and we've got loads of evidence that might be useful in a portfolio. Obviously, the apprentice can take it all in, but the more evidence that's there, it might be harder for them to then find and locate all of that kind of thing. These are the categories of questions that your apprentice is going to be asked. So the mandatory questions will definitely come up. Your apprentice will definitely get a question based around health, safety and environment, regulation, continuous improvement, problem solving, quality and documentation. So if you're looking at this and thinking, well, actually, how do we then put a portfolio of evidence together? You could work it from these categories of questions. Okay, so you could have section 1 in the portfolio might be all to do with health, safety. Section 2 might be all about regulation and so on. All right. The optional questions at the bottom, those what might come up on the day, but might not. All right, so you might have smaller sections at the end where your apprentice might have a little bit of evidence for each one, and then they've got something to discuss around that. All right, so optional questions, change management or control, housekeeping, calibration, and how the organisation fits into the sector. Okay, so this might just be one way you help your apprentices put together a portfolio of evidence. As I've said, this takes up to about an hour and a half. All right, and this is where we're going to start assessing how the apprentices think about their role wider or bigger rather than just their job that we've observed them in the morning time. Again, if you are thinking about time requirements, well, obviously the employer doesn't need to be involved in this, but absolutely the apprentice does. Okay, so this will happen within the day. So we'll do the SAT in the morning, followed by the VCD in the afternoon time. All right, so they've got a full day of assessment. Beyond that then, we do the scenario-based case study. If you think of this a little bit more like a traditional exam, all right, this was set out to test the apprentices' transferable skills, well, their transferable knowledge and skills, all right. A little bit longer, up to 2.5 hours. Some apprentices take the time, some apprentices run out of time, some apprentices do it before time. That's just the way the cookie crumbles, I suppose. It's not necessarily a reflection on how they've done as to how much time they take with it. This is invigilated by a SIAS assurer. And again, as I've said, it's a bit more like a traditional exam. So we do expect that this takes place in a room free from distractions, in silence. It's not an open book. They can't take things in there with them. They just need to go in there and write down their answers. If we're thinking about this then like a traditional exam, it will be in exam conditions, as I've just said, closed book, silence, all of that kind of thing. There is up to 2.5 hours. They can come out of that before that time. We will invigilate that and then we mark it in accordance with the SIAS mark scheme. Again, if you're thinking about your apprentice achieving the higher there, it's an accumulation of marks. The more marks they achieve on this, the higher the grade they are likely to get. All right. So things that come up within the case study. Sorry. We're going to ask them to identify 10. So they're presented with a scenario. All right. This scenario will be based around health and safety, regulations, compliance, all of that kind of thing. We want them to identify 10 incidents within that case study where the poor practice can be identified. What we are then looking for them to do is say, well, actually, what are the implications of those incidents? Okay, so to the employer and the employee, all right? Can we put some corrective actions or resolutions or troubleshoots in place straight away? And then are we able to group incidents and suggest range of common causes for each of the incidents and then put some further recommendations into place? I always think of this a little bit like breaking down a risk assessment. That's ultimately what it's like. This is the situation. Now pick out all of those, pick out the incidents that will come up in there. Can we say what the implication will be to the employer, the employee, and then put some resolutions, troubleshoots in place, and then actually think about the bigger picture. Well, if we take a step back from this, have we got any common causes here? What would be some recommendations that can improve the practice within the company, not just resolve it imminently? Okay, so that there is based around the case study. And this is for the manufacturers as well. All right. So then, tracking the apprenticeship. What we have. So how do we know that our apprentices are progressing? How do we know that they're getting on? Well, actually, in the progress of their jobs, all right? So they'll go on to sites or they'll be inducted into their workplaces. If you're working for a provider, your assessors might go in and observe them. It might be people from the employer observing them. And actually, they see the progress that they're making week on week and month on month. We might then generate some witness testimonies or reflective accounts. There might be Q&As, there might be job reports there. So we can see their progress within the occupation. If they're starting tech certs, we then start seeing the progress during the tech cert. So actually they've completed Unit 1, Assignment 1 of Unit 1 in a BTEC, let's just say, and then actually by the end of the first year or by Christmas time, they've completed all of Unit 1. So then we see that progression again against that tech cert. We might have some additional quals or training in there as well. So that might be NVQs, IOSH, anything that's specialist to the organisation that they require their apprentices to have. So again, it might be that, yep, they become fully trained and therefore actually within a couple of months they're going out on site and they might be, responsible for a bit of health and safety or working towards part of groups and all that kind of thing in the workplace. Obviously, we get them to develop this portfolio of evidence, and initially it might just be that they start compiling a lot of the work that they're doing just as their portfolio. So maybe it's evidence from their BTEC or their NVQs or their observations in the workplace might just be part of their portfolio of evidence. What we should be thinking about, though, is that all of the development, that training, that teaching and learning, it should be tracked against the standard, because on the day, that is what we are assessing against, all right? So that's how they get their overall apprenticeship certificate, and that's what we're going to be assessing against. Has your apprentice met the standard on the day of assessment, all right? In order to do that then, we issue competency evaluation logs and competency trackers on enrolment to SIAS, okay? So this dark blue one, if you're familiar with us, you will know exactly what these documents are, what they look like, how they work, and all of that kind of thing. The dark blue one, this is mandated by us. So this is the one that the employer signs off to say, yes, my apprentice is ready for endpoint. They are safe, they are competent, that training has taken place, all right? We also provide a bit of a light blue one as well. Now, this is from one of the older standards, all right? So there was also a work-based learning guide produced. If you think about the work-based learning guide and the tracker, they are all more or less one and the same document, okay? For the rewrites that have come out, and remember this is there's a review currently going on and we're hoping for the result to come out of that in the summer, there has been no further work-based learning guide released. So we've maintained the tracker just so that you can have, if people do use the work-based learning guide, this is it, just in a slightly different guise to what you've had it in previously, okay? This competency tracker then is not mandated by us at the end. This is very much a work in progress document. So you can use this as and when you require, from the employer's perspective, the provider's perspective, the apprentice's perspective. And all it does is break down the cell a little bit further, so the dark blue book, so that it can be tracked. Ultimately, the idea would be that this can be used throughout the apprenticeship, and then at the end, the employer would just need to transfer all the dates over into the final sign-off, all right? So a little bit of an overview then on the cell. Well, this is a page taken from the cell. So again, if you're familiar with the cell, you have to sign off against all of the standard statements, and that's you as the employer saying, yes, my apprentice has covered training on this, they are ready to be assessed. One of the other things that comes up within this science manufacturing standard is the behaviours evaluation, okay? Now, this is again, it's one of the earliest standards, and therefore this was how the behaviours were assessed, as opposed to if you think some of the newer standards now, it's all part of the endpoint assessment process and is combined more or less into practical observations or technical interviews, things like that. When you are looking at this now then, this is a sign-off from the employer, okay? So what you'll see here, particularly if I can draw your attention to that bottom box, is all of the behaviours are itemised there. So we've got the personal responsibility, the communication, teamwork and independence and responsibility, impact of work, time and change management. As the employer, it was decided that they are the best placed people to know exactly what that apprentice's behaviours are like and how they develop over time. They see them every day, okay? So all the employer is asked to do is to make a judgment against their apprentice's behaviours. Now, for those employers who are thinking, well, actually, what does exceed expectation look like for teamwork or communication? We provide that in the light blue booklet, and I'll come on to that in just a second. What I should draw your attention to, however, whatever you decide your apprentice's behaviours are going to be, that does go towards their final grading, okay? So as I've said previously, the SAT, they can be a pass or a fail. The VCD, they can be a fail, a pass or a distinction. They can for the case study scenario as well, and the behaviours go up to distinction. So if you're looking at this table now, exceeding expectation is the equivalent of a distinction. Meeting expectation would be the equivalent of a pass, and does not meet would be the equivalent of a fail. So we're not going to take any apprentices through to endpoint assessment who are currently sat at a fail and it does not meet expectation. So we are looking for your apprentices' behaviours to be at least meeting expectation. They might be wholly meeting, wholly exceeding, or a combination of the two, and that is absolutely fine. Okay, but this does go towards that final grading. If you're in this and you're from an employer or you're wanting to discuss this with your employers, sometimes the person that we have, the registered assessor, so the person that's going to facilitate for endpoint assessment, again, I'm going to talk about that person a little bit more in a second, they might necessarily be the best person to complete this, okay? That registered assessor might sit a little bit further away from the apprentice. It might be, let's say, a shift supervisor or a line manager or something like that where, yeah, they see them, but they maybe don't see them every shift. So if that apprentice has someone, maybe more like a workplace mentor that they've worked with consistently, they might be able to complete it, and that is absolutely fine if they do that. Okay, so if there has been a workplace mentor that has worked with that apprentice, not necessarily from day one, but just on a frequent, regular basis, so they can make that decision, that is absolutely fine for them to complete that. Okay. As I've said, if you're looking for a little bit of colour around, well, what does exceed expectation look like for impact of work, let's say, you'll find that in the tracker. All right, so there's a big matrix in there that'll show all that. The top box there is Gateway 1 and Gateway 2 completion. So as we said right at the top, Gateway 1 is a health and safety gateway, all right? So it will, it comes up, it tends to happen within the first sort of 6 months. That's what the assessment plan states. And when the apprentice starts on site, they'll be inducted, issued a PPE, done some training. Because it's health and safety, as I've said, it underpins the whole of the training journey, and therefore we should be able to see quite clearly at the end whether the apprentice has that appreciation and understanding of health and safety. Gateway 2 is your traditional end of training period gateway. Okay, so this is when tech certs are completed. Level 2 English and Maths is also completed as well. All right, and obviously the behaviours is part of that gateway. We will liaise directly with the provider to get a hold of these certificates. So if you're the provider in this and you think, well, I've got my cert, my learners have done their, I don't know, City and Guilds process diploma, or they've done their BTEC manufacturing engineering diploma or what have you, and you're sat on those, please just send them through to us. We can keep a hold of them until the endpoints. Okay. Equally, same goes for the level 2 in English and Maths. We liaise directly with the employer for those. So if you're an employer thinking, oh, I don't know if I've sent them through, please send them through and we can sort that. Equally, Rob will be with you at the end and he'll tell you exactly how you can upload them to your provider portal. So that might work nicely for you as well. All right. But this part here, this is the sign off from the employer, remember. So we do liaise directly with the provider for that evidence, but we do need the employer to sign off against it to say it has taken place. So the employer might liaise with the provider just to understand exactly where their apprentice is in terms of this. Okay. So that there is the cell. This section here is the tracker. All right, so as I said, the tracker's not mandated. We don't require site visit at the end. It's very much a work in progress document. If you recall, or some of you might use the work-based learning guides, it's pretty much the same kind of document. This was just issued with us. As I've said, we are going through the review, and the newer standards, they weren't developed, so it was the SIP that had developed the work-based learning guides, and they haven't been for the sort of rewrites that have come through. But we have got the tracker that's still available, and you get that again on enrolment. It might be, as I've said, that it's used by the provider, the employer, the apprentice. It's a work in progress document so that you can record into here and then transfer dates over at the end. Trackers, this one then, as I've said, there will be the matrix of the behaviours in there, so there's a little bit of colour behind, you know, what you're signing for. And the same goes for the standard statements as well. So you will see here, we've got S1, S2, S3. So they are the standard statements. They are taken directly from the assessment plan. And then what we've got actually under there, so those are in the blue boxes at the top. Then we've got the white boxes underneath, and it's just got 1, 2, 3, and 4. So that's the bit of colour that we're providing behind those standard statements. Well, actually, what do the apprentices need to do in practice in order for them to be able to satisfy S1, S2, S3? That evidence record column is a signpost to where that evidence would be. All right, so when you are thinking of a signpost, you're thinking along the lines of, well, actually, does the NVQ cover that? Have they got training records from the employer that will cover that? Do they have a CPD log? Do they have, can you use them from the BTEC? Have we got observations of this? Do they have a one file account or a smart assessing account? And actually, they can just write in there, it's only one file. All right. Again, what we would expect of this is that it, well, as I've said, it's not mandated at the end. You'll have a sign off in the cell that looks quite similar. But again, it's just to signpost the evidence record, and for the employer, when they're coming to sign this off in the cell booklet, they could just transfer this evidence over, check that it's all matching up. All right. So this allows the apprentice or the employer or the provider to track exactly what they're doing. So it might be across, as I've just said, all of the tech certs, MVQs, all the other training that they're doing, but match it directly to the standard, because that's what we're assessing against. Okay. So that's what this document will allow you to do. So then we've come through our training journey. We're well aware of what's going to come at endpoint assessment. How do we help the apprentice prepare for this? Well, who do we need to speak to? The employer and the provider. All right. So we issue at the start of the final year the EPA preparing pack, and I'm going to touch on that in just a second, just about what that is. We then ask that the SIAS registered assessor, so remember this is terminology from the assessment plan, and it is referring to the employer, to the a nominated person from the employer who was competent in the area being assessed. You don't necessarily have to be an assessor, okay? But we will work with that person to do an induction training. And again, I'm going to cover what that covers. I'll cover what the induction training covers rather on a couple of slides. And then we're thinking about commencing the EPA scheduling process about sort of 6 months before the endpoint. These are all nominal timeframes. Okay, this is just for illustrative purposes, so you can sort of see how it works. EPA scheduling process, all we're looking for here is actually, are your apprentices on track to complete their mandated tech certs? Because if they haven't completed that tech cert, we can't take them through endpoint assessment. So at 6 months, we might go, yeah, spot on. At 6 months, we might go, yes, actually, they are finished. We've got some little bits to tie up, but yeah, I would think that, but we're in May now. So I'd say by sort of November time, yeah, my apprentice, currently they are on track to be ready for November for assessment. So that's the kind of thing we're thinking of when we're thinking about scheduling in. All right, it's going to be November. Okay, then, well, actually, have we thought about, start, middle, end? What might it be? We're not looking for, it has to be the 15th of November at 9 o'clock. We're not looking for that. We're just looking for a bit of a guide. Is your apprentice going to be ready for that point? We've just talked about preparing for EPA and issuing of this pack, the apprentice pack. Now, we say we issue this at the sort of year before the end date. If you want this on registration, please don't hesitate just to let us know and ask for it, because we'll send it out to you. All right. The employer will get this, as I've said, about that sort of year, 9-12 months before the end, depends on the length of the program. But as a provider, you can have this from day one. All right. So within that, you're going to get a guide to all of the assessment methods. All right. So you'll get a guide to the SAT that'll again talk about the way we've talked today, a little bit about the tasks, startups, monitoring controls, shutdowns, what kind of other detail might be involved in there. Giving a little bit of, I suppose, understanding your apprentices. So actually remind them if they make an error, they don't automatically fail for sake of argument. All right. They will fail if they don't realise they've made an error and they keep going because it looks like they've got an incomplete understanding. But actually what we want them to do is to recognise that there's been an error there and then troubleshoot it. So can they repeat the task, or are they going to have to verbally troubleshoot that? Now, obviously, if that compromises safety, we do ask that the registered assessor and the SIAS assurer steps in. We don't want anything unsafe happening. But as far as it can go, if the apprentice can identify that they've made an error, great. So we'll have bits of things like that in there. Preparing for the VCD. So within that document, you're thinking about the categories of questions, how we mark, when I was saying before, sort of if you think about it generically speaking, your pass mark would be, okay, then describing how you work, what is your policy process, what's happened in the workplace for you with regard to health and safety, continuous improvement, all of that kind of thing. And maybe the distinction will be looking for more of an explanation. So why is that happening? All right. And then we've got preparing for the case study as well. So thinking about picking out the issues, how to lay it out, what it's going to look like. We will also provide a mock case study and answers as well. All right, so your apprentice can do a trial run. They can go through it and think, right, this is how I would do it, and then match it up to what we said. Look, this is what the answer is. Remember, it's an accumulation of marks for that case study. So the more marks they get, the more likely they are to be distinctive in that area. All right. So planning the assessment day itself then. As I've said, we're thinking before, about 6 months before, 3 months before, are your apprentices on track? We're looking for about 3 months before that planned end date. Again, these are just for illustrative purposes. It depends on the duration of your apprentice's journey. And these are nominal timeframes. But about 3 months, say, we are looking to confirm the EPA date. So let's say, I don't know, we're up to sort of August time. We say, right, are we still on track for November? Yeah, we are, definitely. Actually, I know we'd said the beginning of November, but we've got an order to coming in, or I'm on the 18 days off or something like that, kind of move it till the end. So that's the kinds of things that we'll be talking about, all right? At 2 months before, we are looking to request the gateway evidence. That's your tech cert, your English and maths, your competency evaluation log sign off. As I've said, if you're a provider, you're sat in here and you think, well, actually, my apprentices have done that and they're not due to come out until Christmas, say, and I've got them, send them through to us. We can keep a hold of them for you. Okay, so it's not just you have to wait till the 2 months. If you've got them already, just pass them over and we can have a look. If we're thinking about evidence, gateway evidence, particularly for the tech certs, it doesn't necessarily have to be a certificate. Okay, so if you're thinking you've got summer finishers coming, you might finish your BTEC or your process diploma, whatever it is that you're doing, and you might just get actually a BTEC on an EdXL printout, as long as it has a ULN of the learner's name, date of birth, and that outcome. It has been verified, so that means that you are not awaiting any results of quality checks or anything like that from the organisations. Please, we can accept that. Okay, we would ask for a certificate, but we appreciate that sometimes the certificates can take a little bit longer, and as long as you have some form of proof, then we'll take that through. Okay, we will then approve that gateway evidence, and everything will sort of then be on track for the dates that we've put in. All right, so the registered assessor and the employer, then I've put that bit of a timeline together so you can sort of see we're not necessarily looking to engage with the employer in terms of the registered assessor. So remember, this is just the terminology from the assessment plan. This is the nominated person in the workplace who is competent in the area that is being assessed. We will sort of engage with them within that last year of training, all right, for the apprentice, because actually they might have changed. Apprentices might have moved departments, they might have been on people might have left, all of that kind of thing. So yes, we look for a name at the beginning, but actually we're just going to check that sort of within that last year just to make sure that everything's still okay. We work with this person to help the apprentice prepare for the APA and equally the day of assessment as well. All right. So as I've said, this person is nominated by the employer. They must be a local expert. So as I've said, they must be competent in the role that is being assessed. These are the specifications, I suppose, that we need to hit from the assessment plan in order to satisfy. So they must be competent in the occupation that is being assessed with some form of CPD there or registration. They must have a qualification at the same level or higher of the standard. Equally, if they haven't, and actually it's just because they've been doing the job for the last, I don't know, sorry, 8, 10, sorry. For the last sort of 8, 10, 15 years, we can get a letter from the employer. All we're looking for from there is a statement to say, yes, Joe Bloggs has worked on production for the last 15 years. He is more than competent to facilitate APA for blah, 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 blah. So that's all we're looking for, a statement from the employer that is signed off by the line manager or some person above that registered assessor who can confirm that. And we're looking for experience of current working practices as well. So as I said, there should be somebody who has all of those things that can help facilitate. Once we have that person identified, we ask them to complete an application. Their application, it's not like a job application, all right? All we're asking for is the location of the site, so the name, location of the site, email address, what they would be acting as the RA for, so what standard, what does your apprentice do? In this case, it's going to be SMT. Any CPD that they've got, any quals that they've got. So that's, imagine it's a brief breakdown of that, of an application form there. Once we receive all of that, and maybe it's the employer statement or a CV, whatever that might be, we will book them in for an SIAS induction. So as I've said, when we go through the induction with the employer, we are thinking about the cell sign-off, that's the first thing, and the behaviours. I'm going to touch on that in a second. And then we also look at the second sort of half of that presentation, if you like, is thinking about planning in the endpoint assessment, particularly the SAT. That's the part the employer's involved in. That's the part we need a bit of input and make sure that those tasks are enough for, there's enough in them to allow the apprentice to pass on the day. All right. What we do once that registered assessor from the employer has been inducted, we will issue them with a registration number. That's what they're going to sign off the cell with. All right. So their responsibility then. We've talked about the cell and the sign off from the employer. It should be the registered assessor that does that sign off, okay, within the cell. And it should, well, we've said in here, should be the registered assessor who also signs off on the behaviours evaluation As I've said, if they are not the best placed person to do that, but they are the best placed person to do the SAT and the planning for that specifically, that is fine. They can liaise with another member of staff, let's say the apprentice's mentor or what have you, to complete that or get them to complete it. As long as they sign it and you're from the employer, that is all right. We then want this registered assessor to support the assessment day. So planning the task or tasks that the apprentice is going to be doing as part of the SAT. Okay. We want that registered assessor to help the apprentice prepare for the SAT as well. And I know that the providers in here as well do a good job of helping their apprentices prepare, and they'll do mocks and things like that. But when the employer has planned in those tasks, we would always say, share that with your apprentice. It is not a secret, all right? If they want to do mock-ups, dry runs, all of that kind of thing, they can. If that's their preparation, go for it, all right? But help them to prepare. So show them what they're going to be assessed on. We provide the RAs with that test specification. So show that to your learner, you know, in the back of your mind, just keep this in. These are the 5 elements that we are marking against on the day, or SIAS are going to be marking against. This is what I've planned in for you to do. All right, so give them that overview. Tell them that if they make a mistake, you know, they're not going to automatically fail. They need to recognise they've made the mistake. Can they repeat it? Can we verbally troubleshoot it? You know, how do we keep the situation safe? All right. Once that is planned in, the tasks have been planned in by the registered assessor, we ask that it is submitted to SIAS. And as I've said, we review that content. It is the SIAS assurer that will review it. And what they are looking for is that there's enough within the tasks to say, yeah, if I see an apprentice do that on the day, there's enough there for that apprentice to pass. All right, so that's what we're going to liaise with the registered assessor about in terms of the content of the SAT. If we're coming onto your site, we expect that that registered assessor person will be the person that hosts us, you know, shows us where we need to go. It's not so bad for the first part when we're doing the SAT, but for the VCD, just can you point us in the right direction of the room we'd be going to? And obviously, we want that registered assessor to complete the SAT alongside our SIAS assurer, and they are the local expert providing their guidance on workplace policies, practice, procedure, site safety, all of that kind of thing. All right. So, as I've said at the beginning, in terms of on the day, the actual endpoint assessment time requirement for your registered assessor is that half day to go in, so the 2 to 4 hours, but there is a little planning part before that as well. So, completing the SAT schedule. This is the schedule for that practical observation. We ask that the RA completes it and sends it through to us. We give them some advice. So as I've said, we show them the test specification. This is what we're marking against on the day. Can you plan in tasks that will allow your apprentice to demonstrate competency in each of these 5 areas? So that's what we will do there. We need to make sure that those planned activities provide scope to cover the test specification. Okay, so that's about, are we doing a start up, a monitoring, control, or shutdown? Is your apprentice going to access, use, and documentation, conduct handovers? Can they complete all of the tasks? What's their understanding of correcting documentation they're reporting, and so on. All right. What that planning phase does is that allows both us and the employer to have a full picture of how that assessment day is going to run. All right. So on the run up to, we need you to complete this paperwork, and then on the day we're going to come to site at this time. This is what we're going to do. This is what it's going to look like. All right, so it just allows all parties to then be clear about how that day is going to be run. So then, I know that there was a question come in. I'll pick this one up first. Please don't hesitate if you have got questions, and then we can